Hello, my name is Laura Irvin, and today I want to talk about the historiography of the NAACP. So, stories of violence are overwhelming against African American, and silence was often thought to be of approval, and the fight for equality and freedom for African Americans began prior to the Civil Rights Movement. But we're going to start with the Civil Rights Movement as a starting point, and from the background of how organizations grew and became organized, like the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and how they forced issues of freedom and equality. So violence helped to create change in the world that restricted the African Americans towards their pursuit of liberty and justice. And the NAACP understood that militancy was necessary for the progression of the cause. Although many authors claim that the NAACP was nonviolent, and it did indeed use aggressive tactics to advance the message of freedom and equality for all. So the NAACP, the conference, it detailed the problem for African Americans, and it culminated with an audience that was a combination of both Black and white people to force the issue of things like abolition of segregation, equal educational advantages for colors and whites, enfranchisement for African Americans, and then the enforcement of the 14th and 15th Amendments. So, Orthodox historians often participated in the creation of the civil rights movement, and many were involved with NAACP. Authors such as Mary Y. Ovington, who was a suffragist and a founding member of the NAACP. She outlined the formation and the achievements of the organization in her article, The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Her focus on the social history established the way we view the NAACP. Her writings show how white Americans, because she was herself a white American, feared that the NAACP was restructuring the economic and political power. So she understood that other white Americans did not like the economic restructuring and political power and the pushbacks against the unconstitutionality of the laws. So Ovington noticed how the NAACP published, how they utilized their publishing. And Herbert J. Seligman, who also understood that it has systemized this department, that not only the association's name is familiar to newspaper readers all over the United States, but is also known in all over the parts of the world. So the idea was to get the NAACP's message out into the world and explain the conception of the NAACP as a point of view from a founder. And they created detailed understanding of what the original intentions were. So the original historiography began with what is the NAACP and what were their intentions. And then in the 1950s and 60s, they continued this trend that began in the 1920s of what was the NAACP and how did they continue this organization and what was the organization about. They continued that trend with the composition of white Americans, because the NAACP was supposed to be a combination of both Black and white Americans. And so they also, in the 1950s and 60s, they realized in the writings that perhaps African Americans lacked the ownership they needed, and that was working to limit their causes. And so, in order to remove the Jim Crow and the stigma of the South, that African Americans needed to take charge of the program and the organization. And so, historians noted that structure and how African Americans progressively moved towards roles of leadership in the face of the organization while detailing the goals of the NAACP. So, African Americans emerged as leaders like Walter White and developed the framework for both whites and Blacks together in unity. So, historians continue to write about the NAACP comprehensively with authors like Wilson Record, John A. Morsell, and they provided further details about the roles and the leadership of the organization from its conception. So Record examined the leadership and the underlying factors in the change and those changes in his article, Negro Intellectual Leadership in the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, 1910 through 1940. And Record noticed that the change in African Americans to take hold of the ownership and destiny of their pursuit. So he noticed how African Americans became prominent as leaders. And they traced that path of the NAACP. So the NAACP was able to change and adapt to the environment, became an even later part of historiography. The idea that the development and the evolution of the NAACP continued into the 90s. So the organization created programs of social reforms and evolved, and the organization matured with the new societal issues that they were experiencing. Authors like August Meyer is a historian at Kent State. His notable writings, a white scholar in the Black community, addressed the issues of the progressive movement, ideas of like the New Deal and sociology. They also talked about the established interpretations and changing and reviewing the way the organization handled things like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, when many different organizations that were African American in nature became lethargic in pursuing additional civil rights agendas. So the creation of a media message was also a part of historiography, and it allowed to address the white media's concern and how violence and mayhem that was ensued. So that's a different type of topic that historians talked about, is the violence in the media. And so one way to make sure that the NAACP was founded and understood is they made sure that it was a campaign of non-violence. Even though they used directive action, they wanted to make sure that the media knew that they were non-violence. Another area in which historians have focused was on different leadership roles and different leaders of the movement. So authors like Mary White Ovington, W.E.B. Du Bois, Walter White, William Pickens, those are the big focus as leaders of the NAACP and different chapters. So the idea of my dissertation is the idea that we are going to focus on local leaders and stories about chapters of people that are contributing from a local perspective, and it's their daily lives. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much.